I'm delighted to be joined here today by a super talented panel to talk everything creativity in B2B. So I thought we might start off with some introductions. Now usually we have a tradition at LinkedIn. We ask folks what's not on your LinkedIn profile. I thought since we're at the Cannes Festival today that we just come right out of the gate with some value. So I thought I'd flip that maybe and ask, is there anything that you spotted so far, a learning, a trend, or just something interesting that you've seen at the festival? So we might kick off there with some introductions and then maybe something you've learned.
Yeah, sure. Melissa Weishart, I'm the Global Head of Media at MediaMonks. What I'm seeing, and one of the biggest trends, is really a return to more of a balanced approach, we're going to talk about this later, between brand and performance, and I'm excited to see that sort of come to fruition.
Great.
Mike Pogson, so I'm Executive Creative Director at Together. And I would say a couple of things. I mean, you can't avoid generative AI. I think there's a lot of conversation about that. But for me, probably the more interesting thing is just seeing work that's really starting to bring a lot of different disciplines together. So it's almost sort of transcending what you'd traditionally think of as advertising, bringing sort of science, data, tech, all sorts of things into one piece of work, which is really quite cool.
Very interesting, yeah. And Vijay?
Vijay, ECD of VaynerMedia, EMEA and Global. And what I've seen here, it's just day one at Cannes. And I think I've heard AI, it's like like 527 times that I've heard it today. So another person says it, I'm like, eh.
Yeah. Well, maybe it's AI day or something today. Thank you so much again for joining us. So we just released our B2B benchmark report for 2023. Some really interesting findings and insights. I thought I might put a few of those to you just to get your thoughts and reactions if that works. Melissa, we might start with this one. So this one is really about B2B organizations, I guess, recognizing the importance of brand. So globally, about 6 in 10 B2B marketing leaders are saying their C-suite see brand building as increasingly important in the current economic conditions. Any reactions to that, and is that like reflective of what you're seeing?
Yeah, so a couple of things happening. I think economically, obviously, we've had recession concerns. We've had really unprecedented consumer spending, consumer demand. As that started to wane, people are needing to go back and generating demand. So they're looking at these brand building tactics. And I think from a B2B standpoint, there was a recent study that came out as well that talked about 80% of B2B shoppers already have the list of brands in their consideration set before they even begin researching. And then fast forward to the decision-making process, 90% of those are making decisions from their day one brand list. So when we think about the importance of brand, being top of mind before the shopping journey really begins is super, super important. And I think B2B brands are, again, they're starting to uncover that, but we're at this really interesting inflection point of how they're doing that in some really interesting ways.
Yeah, that's true. So like the search engine in our minds before the search engine on our computers.
Exactly.
Yeah, very interesting. Vijay, maybe this one for you. So over half of marketers are saying that they're looking to invest in, bolder and more creative tactics. Is this something that you're seeing in your day-to-day, or any reactions to that?
I think, we are not like a B2B agency. I think Vayner is more like a cultural platform agency, and clients are coming to us. Like we've got a bank client and we're doing B2B for them, and we've got a tech client and we're doing B2B for them. But what they're trying to, and why they're using us, because we understand platforms and culture a lot better, or a lot differently, I guess. And they're seeing the difference in us using platform culture, using brand personalities and different ways of going and doing it, and doing B2B. I think that's what we're seeing.
Yeah, interesting. And maybe this one for you, Michael. So we've got creative strategy and problem solving are among the top skills that B2B marketing leaders are identifying as important in the current role. But they're also reporting, so marketing leaders are reporting that these skills will continue to be needed into the future. Any reactions to that, and also any tips for how marketers can maybe upskill in those areas?
Yeah, I mean, I think, strategy is about figuring out what you want to do, right? And I think to figure out what you want to do, you have to figure out what the problem is. So it's not hugely surprising that people are trying to upskill in that space, because it's kind of where you need to go if you want to ground the work in something that's effective, right? So it's not surprising. I think the problem with the problem is that the stated problem often is not the actual issue at hand. And I think it's when you're very close to the product or the brand or the service, it's easy to feel biased towards it. So, as it relates to the problem, yes, find the problem, solve the problem, but make sure that the problem you're solving is the right one. I would say, to do that, get out of the space.
Yeah.
Go and talk to some cynics, naysayers. You've got to find the thing that you don't want to say about the brand. You've got to find that thing, because I'm not saying you want to say that, but you have to find what the thing is you don't want to say to find where the real problem is. I think once you get there, then you sort of on a good track. And then, as it relates to strategy, I mean, B2B strategy, I think, there's a lot of evidence to show that it skews a lot towards delivering rational information. We tend to do that in email campaigns, direct marketing. So again, I would say, if you look at, in comparison to B2C, you have this sort of skew towards that side. And if you think about the younger generation coming into the B2B sort of decision-making space now, they openly state, we kind of expect to find the similar sort of brand experience that we have in B2C in our buying journey for B2B. So get out of category, go and look at what other people are doing in sort of consumer and other spaces, because there may well be strategies there that you can deploy, which are going to be more sort of surprising and effective for your space. I mean, beyond that, I'd say there's a whole series of sort of lower level technical things you can do. I mean, we're information age, so if you want to go and learn about Illustrator or being a copywriter, you can do that. Go and find a webinar. But I guess the one question I'd ask around that is, CMOs these days, I think, are sort of starting to have to wear a lot of different hats. They have to do a lot of different things. So just make sure you don't lose the focus. I think it's great that you upskill and you have an understanding of what good looks like for each of these different spaces, but don't expect that you have to be as good as a specialist who's been in them for 10 years. You're just not. Well, it's unlikely that you're going to be, right? So I think figure out where you can add the most value and focus on that.
Absolutely. I know for our team, we did a really good course a couple of years ago, the Mini MBA by Mark Ritson, and it was just one of those things that the entire team did, so from like really junior people right up to really senior folks, and I just kind of taught the foundations of marketing, which is like, it's funny when you're at a really senior level and you're like, do I really need to go back and learn the foundations? But you always do learn something, it's like just the basics of segmentation and positioning and strategy, and often the things that we don't talk about. AI tends to get the headlines and these other kind of bright, shiny objects, but it's oftentimes the really foundational stuff that you need to start from, and it kind of builds a shared language within the organization, I find, as well. And there's a ton of, we have our own LinkedIn learning platform, so there's never been a better time, I think, to be a marketer if you're somebody who puts a lot of time into upskilling.
I mean, things are changing so quickly, and again, you guys have amazing content. Your point on sort of shared language, making sure you have a shared language between not just the marketing organization, to your point of them wearing multiple hats, it needs to be the marketing organization, the data organization, the tech organization, the financial organization, and that sort of shared knowledge, common language, common currency amongst agency partners as well, both creative and media alike.
Yeah, exactly. Well, clearly a lot of marketers are telling us, they want to do kind of, bold or more breakthrough creative. But what are the brand or creative elements that make up really great B2B creative? And any advice for marketers, when they're working with their agencies? BJ, or would you like to start with that one?
Yeah. So I think there's a lot of interesting stuff that you can see. Even B2B, it's moving to B2C. They're learning a lot from B2C. The lines are blurred, and we're looking at even contents that we're doing for B2B marketing that really mimics B2C. And they're looking at, it's not business people that we're talking to. It's not like someone who's leading B2B, they suddenly turn their heads and they become a B2B person. It's not like that. They're still a consumer. They still consume content and information like everyone else. So if you are a creative agency, or if you're an agency and you're helping a business put out the message, and the old school way is doing email marketing, EDM and stuff like that. But now it's just, even on LinkedIn, you see professionals, brand like it's not, nobody's listening and following the brands anymore that much, but they're looking at the leaders in the brands, and they become the spokesperson, and you're just more interested in their story.
Absolutely.
And it's real emotions, like or what I learned, like the way you're selling the brand as a brand leader as well. And we've done this for like big brands like Google and stuff like that, where the leaders become the marketing platform or the tool or the persona, and you're doing that very differently. And a lot of people believe in that more than the brands themselves pushing the product. So there's smart ways of doing that as well. And we're trying to find new ways to be more relevant to the audience. I think that's important for us.
Very interesting. Michael, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, authenticity is this sort of word that gets bandied around quite a lot, but I think as it relates to this, it's sort of true. And again, I don't think it's a coincidence that, influencer-led work is starting to rise to the surface. And there's a sort of watch out there, because in one sense it buys you authenticity because you're speaking to a person instead of a brand. The flip side to that is that they have to genuinely buy into what the brand is and what the product or service is, right? So I think if you can sort of generate a space where you start to have a kind of co-create relationship with influencers, that gets a lot more interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, the other thing that I'd say as well in terms of things to look for, my kind of mark of a really interesting, decent piece of work is, I'm not in the market to buy an enterprise IT solution. I'm never going to be.
Yep.
But if you put a piece of work in front of me that's talking to me about that, and I want to spend time engaging with it, and I read it, and I think that's sort of interesting.
Yeah.
I think you've done a really good job. And you can do that. There's lots of examples out there of work that has nothing. There's no connection to me buying it. But I'll spend time engaging with it, and I'll remember the brand because of that. So I think that's not a bad thing to try and shoot for in B2B.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
That's an interesting one, being memorable, even on different platforms. Like, it's not just for consumers, like I said, right? Even in business, like you can be memorable. Absolutely. And his point of being authentic and not just using influencers for the sake of influencers. And that's why people who consume or who use the brand, like people who buy it, those are the right influencers when you're talking in terms of B2B. But it's a good point.
Yeah. I mean, from a media standpoint, we're talking about needing to reinvest in brand that needs to be top of mind, but it still needs to be breakthrough, right? These are consumers, and you're still reaching a consumer who's being targeted and confronted with so many other messages. So that notion of being breakthrough, that notion of being memorable, that notion of attention is just as equally important here. So I think it needs to be just, again, when we're thinking about where those places we're making media choices, it's not just about where we're showing up, it's about how we're showing up with our media choices as well. The creative idea doesn't stop at a banner ad or a video spot. How can you show up in interesting, innovative ways, doing things that people have never done from a media standpoint before? And I think, partners such as yourself are so great about leaning in and doing the thing that's never been done before. And I think I'd love to see a lot of additional B2B brands take advantage of that, especially as we're in this place where they need to be top of mind before that journey ever begins. So excited to see how some of that takes shape.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, that's the magic formula, right? Like when a great creative idea meets a great media strategy. And the role, obviously, that media can play in landing a creative idea. Are there any brands that you think are doing that particularly well?
Yeah. I think Netflix does an exceptional job of figuring out how can you tell the story in a really, really interesting way, and then how are you making media choices as well that builds upon the creative idea to make it that much more memorable. Yeah.
Any B2B brands generally that you just think are doing a fantastic job when it comes to creativity?
I think if you look, it was interesting that last year was the first year that Cannes got its own B2B specific category. So I think, you tend to hold Cannes up as one of the kind of pinnacles of creative achievement. And if you look at the work that went in there, I think some great examples actually. The Sunny Dole, I think it was, with the Pinatex. I think it's a really good example actually of what I was saying before about bringing different disciplines together. To create something that transcends that advertising space. So in that example, it was about pineapples. You cut the leaves off and they go to waste and they create a lot of methane and they create a lot of problems in the environment. And they found a way of sort of taking that waste product and turning it into a leather substitute. Really, really interesting. But of course, it's all the time. It's building your brand. It's building your credibility and awareness and presence in the space. So, I think there's a lot of brands in the B2B space that are starting to kind of do some really interesting work.
Yeah, I've seen some stuff on LinkedIn as well, like Cereal, the cereal brand. They're doing quite cool stuff on LinkedIn especially. And even Zoom, they are doing B2B, but the way they communicate is really B2C. And they're having fun with the content on LinkedIn, when usually I think they're disrupting the algorithm or the way you consume as well. You're looking at really professional stuff, and then suddenly you see Cereal or you see Zoom, and they're actually having fun with the space. It just stands out,
for sure.
I think the sort of point around creativity in the B2B space is that there's a lot of different ways that you can define creative and creativity, but one way of looking at that is it's about subverting something that we're sort of currently used to interacting with in a certain way, or repurposing that in an unexpected fashion. And I think in B2B, for some reason, there's historically been a tendency to want to kind of follow this worked, so that's what we need kind of approach, which immediately cuts off opportunities in that space to do something more effective ultimately. And I think that is what creative buys you. It's effectiveness. Which is good to remember.
Absolutely.
There's a point to it.
I think there's a really important notion there and subtext there around experimentation. And I think from a B2B standpoint, a lot of times the buying journeys are really, really slow. So it takes a long time to sort of test and see what works. The one thing that I would say is, as we talk about creativity within this space, which is going to be so critical to stand out, we need to get really comfortable with experimenting and testing much more often. So the one thing that I encourage is, yes, there's a ton of great measurement solutions. There's a lot of great, platform solutions as well. But instead of trying to sort of get to perfect measurement, what are those strong signals that you can get to get good indicators to bring experimentation more into the cycle, do it more often, test as many things as you possibly can. Sure, you may not get the complete closed loop results until a little bit further down the path, but I in every single category I've looked at, there are generally indicators that you can model to figure out those proxy metrics to inform your testing strategy and really increase the velocity of learnings.
I think that's a good one, like testing and just learning and understanding what the consumers or the people who consume it kind of say. The comment section, honestly, it's like a gold mine. When you put something out and you're testing and people just reacting to it, and brands actually reacting to it. I think B2B, you always fall into the trap of like, oh, I'm not going to react to this. I'm just going to let them say whatever they say. But then if you start reacting, like I've seen Zoom do that quite a bit, like they're reacting and playing with on the comment section. That's quite interesting as well. Then you learn, like you said, you test and then you start building stronger pieces of content that's more relevant to the audience. That's cool.
There is a sort of natural tension there between really good creative tends to do something that's not been done before, and inherent in that process is the risk of failure. So absolutely. How do you get comfortable with that? Because that's really where, if you want to be a leader in your field, you've got to kind of get on that page, and you've got to find ways of, your internal organisation buying into that process, and how you can put boundaries around it and sort of safeguard it to get to a good place, which is not always easy.
Love that. So playing, subverting expectations, testing, all absolutely key elements when it comes to creativity in B2B. We're going to have to leave it there, guys. It's been a really interesting panel. Thank you so much for taking the time. Really appreciate it. And thank you, everybody, for tuning in at home.